ॐ नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स। ॐ नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स। ॐ नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स. Continuing our study of this book, Buddhist Thought in India, wherein we are discussing about the tacit assumptions, wherein we came to the triple world and the levels of reality. And the author has just now stated that both the perennial philosophers of East and West had certainly contact with this, considered contact with this triple triple reality, of which they valued being in contact or coming into contact with the highest reality, which he also used the word, what is the reality in itself, the svabhava, to be important. Continuing, about this time there began in Europe that estrangement from reality which is the starting point of most modern European philosophy. Epistemology took the place of ontology, where ontology was concerned with the difference between reality and appearance. Epistemology concerned on that between valid and invalid knowledge, because these two words are so essential for our study. So let's pay attention to this one. Where ontology was concerned with the difference between reality and appearance. Reality and appearance. Epistemology concerned on that between valid and invalid knowledge. So in ontology, we are trying to determine the being, the true being, versus what appears. And in the epistemological study, we are interested in knowing, of course, we have what is the process of knowing? How do we validate that what we know is real? So what is a valid knowledge? What knowledge is not valid? So that is the study and scope of epistemology. The alchemists who set the tone for all later phases of modern philosophy asserted that things by themselves have no relations to one another, and that a mind external and unrelated to them establishes all relations between them. Things have no relations and mind only establishes relationships. Ontology as a rational discipline then lost its object, and all questions concerning being qua being seemed to be merely verbal. Being qua means being as it is. Being qua, being seemed to be merely verbal. Science should not concern itself with the things themselves, but with their signs and symbols. And its task is to give an account of appearances, salvare apparentias, without bothering about the existence in esse at secundum rem of its hypothetical constructions. This is what is important. Science should not concern itself with the things themselves, but with their signs and symbols. And its task is to give an account of appearances without bothering about the essence in esse at secundum rem of its hypothetical constructions. In consequence, thinkers seek for successful fictions, and reality has become a mere word. In consequence, thinkers seek for successful fictions, and reality has become a mere word. Of course, we must recognize all this is a preface and laying the foundation to the main objective of this philosophical inquiry, which is reality. How do I know the real? What is real here in our experience? It is remarkable that 1400 years before the Mahayana Buddhists had taught almost exactly the same. When they realized their estrangement from reality, they looked for a reality more real than they found around them. That is, for the dharma element itself. It is remarkable that 1400 years before, the Mahayana Buddhists had taught almost exactly the same. When they realized their estrangement from reality, that is going far away from reality, they looked for a reality more real than they found around them. That is, for dharma element itself. So dharma element is the term or the word used for to indicate the reality as it is in Mahayana Buddhism. Modern philosophy concludes that it is better for us to turn our backs on nebulous ideas about reality as such and to concentrate on gaining power over the environment as it appears. Power by whom and for whom? Here a philosophy which teaches that the particular alone exists and that universals are mere words finds refuge in an abstraction called man, who is somehow regarded as the highest form of rational being and for whose benefit all these developments are said to take place. To Nagarjuna and his followers, this by itself would seem to indicate a serious logical flaw as the very basis of such doctrines. Means considering the man as the highest and for whom all this for benefit all these developments are said to take place is not palatable to Nagarjuna's thinking. Nagarjuna, who of course contributed significantly to the Mahayana Buddhism. 2c. Finally, and that is much easier to understand, the hierarchical structure of reality is duplicated by and reflected in a hierarchy among the persons who seek contact with it. Like it is known by like is known by like, and only the spirit can know spiritual things. In an effort to commend Buddhism to the present age, some propagandists have overstressed its rationality and its kinship with modern science. They often quote a saying of the Buddha, who told the Kalamas that they should not accept anything on his authority alone, but examine and test it for themselves, and accept it only when they have themselves cognized, seen and felt it. So this is a reference to a conversation with Kalamas, where Buddha taught them and said, don't have to go by my authority, but you investigate and come to know the same thing. But of course, this is not really the kind of science that we are envisaging now. This is what the author is saying. In this way, the Lord Buddha finds himself conscripted as a supporter of the British philosophical tradition of empiricism. But who can do the testing? Some aspects of the doctrine are obviously verifiable only by people who have certain rather rare qualifications. To actually verify the teaching On rebirth, by direct observation, one would have to actually remember one's own previous births, an ability which presupposes the achievement of the fourth dhyana. There is a hierarchy of dhyanas, and he says rebirth can be understood only when somebody reaches the fourth dhyana out of the 8. A state of trance extremely scarce and rarefied. And what wit and maturity of insight would be needed to actually know that the decisive factor in every event is a moral one, or that nirvana means the end of all ill. And what width and maturity of insight would be needed to actually know that the decisive factor in every event is a moral one, and that nirvana means the end of all ill. So basically he's saying it is not accessible to everybody. Only to those who are having a very deep and broad insight can come to know the real significance of events. The qualifications are moreover existential and not merely intellectual. Buddhism has much to say about the spiritual hierarchy of persons. For what someone can know and see depends on what he is. What he is. So the saint knows more than an ordinary person. And among the saints, each higher grade more than the lower. In consequence, the opinions and experiences of ordinary worldlings are of little account, on a level with the mutterings of house painters laying down the law about Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin of the Rocks. So ordinary wall painters cannot know the quality and the highest level of artistry in the Leonardo da Vinci's painting. So it's not something to be judged by ordinary painters. Buddhism resembles the other world religions much more than it resembles modern science. And its religious character colors its thinking in at least 2 ways. Now he is talking about another important point, and he says Buddhism resembles the other world religions much more than it resembles modern science. So comparison is not really between modern science versus Buddhism, but Buddhism versus other religions. And its religious character colors its thinking in at least 2 ways. So there is a religious character into the Buddhism. Those 2 characters are being discussed here. Until quite recently, all human societies took the separation of the sacred and the profane for granted. Certain places were set apart as holy places. As in distribution of space, so in the universe of discourse. Some words were numinous, means scriptural or sanctified, numinous. Others rational or ordinary. If treated as though purely rational, numinous terms suffer a great deal of distortion. Means sacred words get distorted. An easy example is the word God. Natural theology or the deists used it as a rational term. God, they used it as a rational term. But as Pascal put it, this God of the philosophers is something quite different from the God of Abraham and Isaac. God of the philosophers. God of the philosophers is something quite different from the God of Abraham or Isaac. And Oxford Don showed his blindness for this distinction when he criticized Jehovah for describing himself by the tautological phrase, I am that I am. When in fact, he ought to have told us exactly what he was. Mr. Meister Eckhart's beautiful meditation on this phrase from the book of Exodus shows that ho on is clearly a numinous term of great profundity. No student of the Buddhist scriptures in the original can fail to notice that they abound in numinous words such as Dharma, Buddha, Bhagavat, Arhat, Nirvana, and Tathagata. Their prominence had many important consequences. So basically, the words also have certain sanctity built into them as the people understand. Whereas the rational science does not really look into that aspect of it. It accounts to some extent for the ambiguity and multivalence of nearly all the key terms of Buddhist philosophy. This disregard for the first requisite of an ideal language, which would be that there should be one name for every simple and never the same name for two different simples, is unlikely to be due to mere carelessness and thoughtlessness, nor it be blamed on the poverty of the available Sanskrit vocabulary. In fact, Sanskrit offers a wider range of philosophical synonyms than any other language except Greek. Probably, the numinous character of the terms used is responsible. On closer analysis, words such as manasikara, that is attention, upeksha, even-mindedness, dhatu, element, or akasha, space, turned out to contain a great variety of meanings. If the later Buddhists did not distinguish these meanings by separate terms, the reason was that the traditional, though multivalent, terms were hollowed by the fact of their having been uttered by the Lord Buddha himself. It would therefore have been an act of impiety or sacrilege to replace them with profane, though perhaps more accurate terms. Because these words have come as being used in the Buddha's spoken words. So they have not been replaced with any possibly more accessible meanings, different variety of words to represent different shades of the meanings of the same word. So they have not been done. So because of which the real meaning remains hidden for ordinary folks. There are other reasons also for the multivalence of Buddhist technical terms, those which concern the particularly sacred core of the doctrine discourse, their meaning in a state of religious exaltation. Those which concern the particularly sacred core of the doctrine disclose their meaning in a state of religious exaltation. To give them a precise logical definition would seem a task too trivial to bother about. Furthermore, semantic distinctions between important to the extent that communication has broken down. Furthermore, semantic distinctions become important to the extent that communication has broken down. Among lovers, communication is very easy. They understand each other perfectly well, and each one intuitively knows what the other's words mean. In the absence of such a bond of sympathy, every word must be defined, and nevertheless, misunderstandings continue to arise faster than they can be removed. Buddhist thinking was designed for a sangha, or community of like-minded people, who at least in theory, were more brethren than rivals, who had had the same training, never ceased to agree on fundamentals, and who understood one another's mental processes. When they heard these terms, they simply knew what was meant. Just as an educated Englishman can read a piece of sophisticated prose without looking up the words in a dictionary, though also without being able to convey their full meaning to half-educated persons. In actual fact, the meaning of words is defined by their usage among the elite of insiders, who among themselves rarely experience much difficulty. It is when the message has to be conveyed to outsiders that precise definitions, semantic distinctions, and so on become necessary. A soteriological doctrine like Buddhism becomes a philosophy, a soteriological, meaning basically about transmigration, etc. A soteriological doctrine like Buddhism becomes a philosophy when its intellectual content is explained to outsiders. This is not a particularly rewarding task, but in this book I have undertaken it. It must never be forgotten that it involves a huge loss of substance. So here the author Edward Conze is saying that he is taking the Buddhist philosophy whose goals are actually soteriological, meaning what is death, what is transmigration, rebirth, that is to be answered by the Buddhist philosophy, whereas it is being explained now in some dry intellectual content is to be its content is to be explained to people who are only looking for in a logical sense, where they don't have a sympathy with the sentiments behind this whole goal of soteriological benefits. 3b. There are 4 possible sources of knowledge. Number 1, sense perception. Number 2, reasoning. Number 3, intuition. 4, revelation. So there are 4 sources of knowledge: sense perception, reasoning, intuition, revelation. Buddhists regard sense perception as basically misleading. If reasoning is taken to mean inference from sense data, it is condemned together with its basis, which is the sense perception. Alternatively, as in European rationalism, it may mean the apprehension of an intelligible as distinct from sensible world. Means it is distinct from the sensible world, but it cannot be expressed. That is what the European rationalism means. The European rationalists believed that at least 4 different kinds of things cannot be deduced from sense data. That is, laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, moral principles as distinct from moral rules, and natural law as distinct from the actual laws of any given society. So these are the 4 that European philosophers believed they cannot be deduced from the sense data. Again, to repeat, the laws of logic, laws of mathematics, moral principles as distinct from moral rules, and natural law as distinct from actual laws of any given society. What is the natural law versus what is the law that is being practiced in the society? In the Buddhist scheme of things, the study of the dharmas is a rational approach to intelligible entities. So here the word, if you see, study of dharmas is compared with the intelligible entities, which are the rationalism of Europeans. That's what it says. In the Buddhist scheme of things, the study of the dharmas is a rational approach to intelligible entities. Cognition, this is gnana, is established by paying attention to dharmas. Cognition or gnana is established by paying attention to dharmas. Attention to dharmas. Those Buddhists who specialize in the Abhidharma constitute the rationalistic wing of this religion. The rationalistic wing of this Buddhist religion are what is known as Abhidharmists, those who study the Abhidharma. Abhidharma describes and details the dharmas. And cognition or gnana is established by paying attention to those dharmas. The rationality even of the Abhidharma does, however, require 4 qualifications. The rationality even of the Abhidharma does, however, require 4 qualifications. The rational approach is only provisional and preparatory and must be followed by a spiritual intuition, the direct and unconceptual character of which is stressed by the use of such words as to see, to taste, to touch with the body. So even though the Abhidharma studies parallel the rationalism of the European approach, still it is not complete in itself. It has to be combined or followed by the spiritual intuition. The spiritual intuition should be is nothing but the direct and unconceptual character, of which is stressed by the use of such words as to see, to taste. So this is not just a matter of the intellect, but a direct experience, though it is using the words to see, taste, which are appearing to be sensorial. They are not sensorial, they are within quotes. To touch with the body means they're talking about a direct experience. That's what it means. Of the dharma as the delivered, see it. Of the dharma as the delivered, see it. So what we are talking about is the dharma is being seen by those who are delivered, means who have crossed the boundary, who have crossed the bondage. That is what is meant by of the dharma as the delivered, see it. The Buddha says that it is profound, hard to see, difficult to perceive, calm, sublime, not within the sphere of merely abstract thought. Atarka avachara. Atarka avachara. Subtle, to be experienced only by judicious sages. To be experienced judicious sages. So here he is trying to explain the rationalistic approach of the Europeans can be parallel with the Abhidharma study groups, or the approach or the branch of Buddhism. But even there it needs to be augmented, followed up by the direct experience, of which this sentence is very important. Of the dharma as the delivered, see it. Dharma as the delivered, see it. Means those realized people see it. The Buddha says that it is profound, hard to see, difficult to perceive, calm, sublime, not within the spheres of merely abstract thought, subtle, to be experienced only by judicious sages. So these are the very important ideas about the knowledge about the fruit that is supposed to be gained, and we will continue. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.